When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963, George Raveling was part of a volunteer security force. Raveling was an assistant basketball coach at Villanova then. When King finished the speech, Raveling asked for it, and King gave it to him. Raveling, of course, went on to coach Division I basketball for 22 years, and he's now a Nike executive. He keeps the speech in a bank vault in Los Angeles. He says he has no plans to sell it, despite one valuation of $25 million. The speech changed America. 50 years later, Chris Connolly also has a first-hand account.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
That day, that great demonstration known as the March on Washington, took place 50 years ago on August 28, 1963, when 250,000 people peaceably assembled to demand an end to America's long and ugly history of racial inequality. I was one of those people. That 6-year-old me standing next to my mother and my grandmother. You can tell from our clothes that it was a warm day. You can tell from our smiles that we were proud to be in attendance. It might sound strange, but back then, everyone my age knew about the civil rights movement. We'd all seen the footage from Birmingham of police dogs and fire hoses being used on African-American school children. I'd been to some ball games in New York City, but I can remember being amazed at the sheer size of the crowds that gathered here. And I can remember really liking having a sign to hold, even if I didn't have a stick to raise it high.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time.
The march called for an end to the South's Jim Crow laws, which mandated racial segregation in public places. The march called for protection for the right to vote, the desegregation of public schools, an end to jobs discrimination, a comprehensive civil rights bill. Yet in the charged atmosphere of that era, these were not modest goals. No wonder, perhaps, that the speech Martin Luther King planned to give here 50 years ago, the speech he stayed up until 3 a.m. writing, was originally entitled Normalcy Never Again.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Yet as Dr. King looked out upon the throng, as he heard the response his calls for freedom generated from the hundreds of thousands gathered together, he put aside his prepared remarks and, drawing from memory and inspiration, began to speak the words by which the greatest American speech since the Gettysburg Address would always be remembered.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
By the end of 1965, a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act had been passed by Congress and signed into law, a product of this day 50 years ago, and a vision of the nation we now recognize as our own stirred into life.
When we allow freedom to reign, when we let it reign from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at
last. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream.
The impression that it made on me is everything. You know, when he said, free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last. Those things stuck with me and still does for a long time.
As we say in the South, Dr. King gave black folk hope.
To be there and to, just be surrounded by people, black and white, it felt so very exciting. And then to have this moment when we all came together at one place, whether you're from Connecticut or from Alabama, we were all in one place there to support the same movement and demand change and freedom in America.
Martin Luther King is the epitome of a leader, a guy who, he turned the other cheek. Everything that he spoke about, everything that, he wanted others to believe in, he exhibited.
Everybody likes to talk about the I Have a Dream speech and its effect on the African-American community, but Martin Luther King actually had a bigger impact just on the United States and everyone in general, just their view of the world.
King understood the power of sports and the struggle for human rights. He called Jackie Robinson a freedom rider before freedom rides. King fought for fair housing in Louisville with native son Muhammad Ali. And years after John Carlos joined Tommy Smith in their Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympics, Carlos told Sports Illustrated that Dr. King was in my mind and heart when I raised my fist on that podium.